from my computer. So if need be, I can switch over to my phone.
All right, so we're live. Uh, hey guys, welcome back to Critical African Thinkers. As you know, this is a place where we examine everything under the microscope of logic to ascertain what is most factual and logically consistent. So, we've been having various conversations, and most of our conversations are centered around things happening in the US. But we needed to be much more diverse, talk about things from other parts of the world, talk about things from Africa. And I think Stanley really wanted to learn some things about what's going on in Africa, right? So I decided to bring in my good friend Virtue Grace, who is a YouTuber, a Nigerian YouTuber, and she's traveled around some countries in Africa. She has experiences from being exposed to other cultures in Africa. So I think she'd be in a better position to give us a fair idea as to what the continent is. I'm Nigerian. I'm in Nigeria. She's Nigerian. She's in Nigerian too. But my perception of what Africa is might be limited to what I see from the news or what I read. But since she has gone round, she would have a better perspective. So in this stream today, Stanley is going to take the lead. Stanley, I have no questions prepared. You have all the questions that you want to ask Grace, and
Uh-oh.
I will chime in when I have to chime in. And introductions first. This is Stanley. Stanley Cross is a very good friend of mine. He's American. And Stanley, if I can remember correctly, you're in Georgia.
Yep.
Um,
Outside of
correct.
Atlanta.
Good. Good. I was thinking Steve would be able to join us and Wolf too. So maybe they would try and join later. If not, we'll just go ahead. And Grace is Nigerian. She's my friend. She's a YouTuber too. I think you checked out her channel as well to see
I
what
did.
she's up to. So, Grace, welcome to Critical African Thinkers. I hope I hope we have fun. So, at this point, Stanley, it's over to you. Let me sit back, relax, and listen.
Grace, can you hear me? She's spinning, so I'm sure she'll come back pretty soon. Most of my questions, they're not awfully complicated or anything, or even
Yeah.
controversial. I'm on my best behavior. So,
Well, okay, so maybe you want to ask me some things first before she comes.
well,
Sure.
watching Grace's videos, we talked about the pig as a dowry,
Yeah.
which I found kind of interesting. And I'll have to do some reading or researching myself. It was just curious that like a pig, like a regular pig. I was curious to know how that became tradition because I don't think pigs are actually native to Africa.
Mm.
So, I was just kind of curious, like, well, that's interesting, but what happened before? I mean, I know certain parts of Africa. I think they'll do cattle, like cattle is bride prices. I was just curious, and it's really probably not. It's probably a dumb question. I was just curious,
Mm.
how pigs became important
Okay,
or
so
tradition.
I don't know what part of Africa, Grace, what part of Africa do they use pig as part of the bride price list?
What?
What part of Africa, where in Africa do they use pigs as part of the bride price list? Oh, she's off.
Well,
Okay,
she
so
did a whole video.
oh. So did you find out what country in Africa they did that?
Yeah, it was Bimway. How do you
Oh, Benue State. I think
Benway?
that's where she's from. I think from my side, it's more a goat than I think goats. They use goats in my side. So I think maybe in her side they use that. So
And
our
it's
network is a
neither
bit
it's
patchy.
neither here nor there. I was just it was interesting and
No, I think culture is dynamic, right? So there are a lot of things that get incorporated into the culture over time.
Hmm.
Like like if you look at the traditional attire of, say, the king in Benin, right? It has a lot of the elements from Portuguese priests, from, you understand?
Yeah.
So over time, some things get incorporated into the culture. Like in my culture, part of our traditional attire is the walking stick, is the hat, the some sort of like the cowboy hat, right?
Hmm.
And that's really not native to us, but it's part of our native attire now. So things get incorporated into the culture from, from other cultures as well. So even if pigs are not native to Africa, it is very, very possible that with time, as those animals became introduced into the continent, they become incorporated into the culture as well.
Got it.
Yeah. So we can go on. We can go on until Grace is able
Well,
to
no, I
come.
thought
Oh, she's back.
she's actually really good at videos.
Yeah,
Um,
she is.
I she hey Grace, uh, travel in Africa being expensive. I understand why. I was just curious, and it kind of loops into like kind of like an international politics point. How um, how prevalent it, does China have a big presence in Nigeria currently? And I don't know. I was just curious because I know in other parts of Africa they're doing infrastructure like railroads and roads and stuff.
Okay, so for China, China has a China is one of the biggest trading partners of Nigeria, right?
Hmm.
So, and there are loans that the government of Nigeria, and the Chinese loans, actually, there are Chinese loans working in Nigeria. And many of the constructions, many of the probably roads and some other infrastructural developments are usually Chinese firms.
Uh-huh.
Although we still have I think European or American firms like Julius Berger in terms of roads. Julius Berger does some roads for us too. But there is a strong bilateral trade relationship with China and Nigeria, and their Chinese businesses are actually a lot of these businesses are growing in Africa. Since I'm more in the pharmaceutical space, I know more of Indians, right? So there are a lot of Indians that are in the pharmaceutical space in Nigeria. In fact, some of them will tell you that Nigeria is a very fertile ground. That a lot of Indians come to Nigeria to do their business in terms of pharmaceuticals. China, yeah, yeah, but
Well,
I don't
uh,
have the exact.
my question, and Grace, you brought up how expensive travel can be inside Africa. And I guess my question is, Chinese coming in and doing infrastructure. And I think Russia, I don't know about Nigeria, but I know Russia has a presence too. Is infrastructure a big priority? Like, when China comes in, and not necessarily Nigeria, but other countries, when China comes in, is infrastructure and getting travel within Africa, down to affordability. Is that a priority? And I know it's more a political question.
Grace, did you get that question?
No.
Okay, so
Uh oh.
Stanley, can you take the question again? So maybe.
Yeah, you mentioned Grace that.
His internet is actually glitching, so I didn't hear anything.
Okay, so Stanley, just repeat the question again. So,
Um, you Grace, you mentioned that travel in Africa is very expensive. Even say Nigeria to Ghana, or wherever within Africa, and knowing that there's a lot of loans and just a China presence and a Russia presence, but China is actually what I'm interested in. Um, is infrastructure a priority? If the Chinese can come and help and develop infrastructure in different African countries, how big a priority is travel type infrastructure, roads, railroads, that sort of thing? Ports is another thing that I kind of got an interest in.
Okay. I think she's having serious network issues. So let me see if I can answer that question. So travel within Africa itself, you're saying it's expensive, right?
Right. and
How
and she
how
did a whole video about how expensive it can be.
so I think in terms of when you're saying the infrastructure, are you saying between African countries, within
Yeah.
African countries itself?
Well, she
Uh,
was talking about going home to Benue,
yeah.
and I'm sure I'm pronouncing it wrong, but it was a very circuitous route where, she had to fly to Abuja and then
Mm,
kind of do, road travel. It
mm,
wasn't a very direct trip. She had to kind of get close, then come back.
okay. Okay.
So, and that's expensive. I was just curious to know, is anyone working on making travel cheaper, easier, more direct?
Yeah. I think
Knowing that China, is there making loans, supposedly working on infrastructure, etc.
mm, so. I think what happened in that case was probably there was no airport in Benue. So Abuja is the closest place to Benue where they have the airport. So she had to fly from Lagos to Abuja and then take the road trip to Benue. Nigeria has 36 states and there are a lot of cities, and not all the states have local airports where planes come into. So the major cities: Lagos, Kano, Kaduna, Benin, Warri, Port Harcourt, um, Rivers. That's Port Harcourt as well. Um, I think there are flights to Gombe now in the north, Sokoto, so Bayelsa. So most of the major cities, they have airports where planes can come into, but not all. So that's why she had to travel from Lagos to Abuja and then take the road route.
Well, she
Yeah.
made a comment that one leg of the trip,
Mm.
the roads weren't so good, so she was more
Yep.
or less forced to go to Abuja, which made it more expensive.
Yes. So
And I was just, it's maybe a complicated question and one that I should research, but I was just curious to know, is travel infrastructure, roads, airports, ports, like, is anyone working on making it less cumbersome, less expensive? Is that a priority?
well, they're a priority for us as citizens, but I don't know if they're a priority for the government, because what they do is they start these projects that they don't get to complete, right? So most of the time, these projects just drag on for years and years, and they keep appropriating money to it, right? So this administration comes, they would campaign that we're going to fix this road, right? And they will appropriate billions to that project, right? They don't get to finish it. The next administration come, they use the same talking points. We're going to do this road, or we're going to build this infrastructure. So it's just a cycle. It's a cycle of corruption, if you would say, right? Yeah. So it's a priority for us, but the government, they don't seem to take it as a priority. Yeah.
Interesting.
Sorry, Grace, your network has been sort of bad. You were going in and out, going in and
My
out.
network is my network is giving me a hard time here. Seems
I
like you've passed the baton over to me.
Yeah.
Can
So
you
my
can you
network
hear
is
me
still
any better
terrible.
now?
Yes, so what was Stanley's question? Charles, maybe you could re-echo his question because it seems
Okay.
your audio is better.
Okay, so what Stanley was asking he said he watched one of your videos where you talked about travel in Africa, how expensive it is. I think you made a trip from maybe Lagos to Abuja and then from Abuja to Benue, right? When you were going home, the roads were bad, so you did not get a straight route from say Lagos to Benue. So he was asking if infrastructure is a priority for Africa, and is there any plan to road infrastructure, and is there any plan to, oh, she's off again. Oh, good lord, today's stream is very, very interesting. Yeah, SKC is saying infrastructure is extremely difficult to build and maintain when civil unrest and corruption exist. Yeah, true, true, true. So
Yeah,
that,
I in my audio to you is okay?
yeah, perfectly, perfectly okay.
Huh.
Perfect. Yeah. So Grace, can you hear us? Okay. So Stanley, maybe you can just be asking me the questions as it comes. If Grace is able to contribute, then she'll give a
Okay.
thought. Yeah.
Um um I know not necessarily in Nigeria.
Mm,
Indians have had a presence in places like South Africa
a
and
lot,
other
a lot of
countries
presence in South
for
Africa.
a century or more. And India and China are having like an ongoing border dispute. And I
Mm,
was curious to know how Indian heritage people who are Africans, who
mm,
been in Africa for generations, and maybe it's not a question you can answer, but I was just
mm.
curious if you had an idea of how Indians who have heritage in Africa, been there for generations, how they are reacting to China being a player in a few African countries. I mean, are there Indian China like scuffles?
Nah, there are none. I think India is interested in trade. China is interested in trade. Their border disputes don't get transported out of China and India.
I
So
see.
yeah, so there are none of such skirmishes, to
Okay.
my knowledge. Yeah.
No tensions.
Grace, welcome back. We hope we're able to keep you this time.
Uh, and actually, I only have one other question, and I'm sure I'll think of more. But there was Grace did a video on the Cleopatra, the Netflix Cleopatra
Yeah.
um, movie,
Yep.
and she made a really good point that I
Mm,
totally agree, and it kind of dovetails on a comment, and I can't remember if the guy was Nigerian or from another African country,
mm,
but he made the point, and I think Grace made the point that history in the African education system tends to have a narrative that doesn't emphasize Africa. You will hear a lot about Western concepts, that sort of stuff, but you never hear about the contributions that Africans in Africa made, even once the colonial powers were there a century ago. You never hear about what Africans did. You hear a lot about what other, you hear a lot about what colonials did. You don't
mm,
hear about African contributions in Africa, and you don't hear a lot about African history before colonialism. And I
mm.
thought it was a great point. Grace, you talked about owning our narratives. And I thought that was an important point, and one that I thought was just, spot on.
Grace, did you get that? Oh,
I didn't.
you didn't.
Please
Okay.
re-echo his question to me.
Okay, so it was more a comment. So he said that he watched your video on the Cleopatra thing, the Netflix Cleopatra thing, and then you made the point that, which he agreed with, that a lot of the time when history is being taught in Africa, there's an emphasis on what the colonials did, what the explorers did, what the Europeans did, and there is not so much of what Africans themselves did, either prior to, during, or after the colonial period. So he was just saying that that you said something about Africans owning their narratives, right? And it was something that I agreed with. Yeah, so that was what he was saying.
Yeah, apologies for my internet. Yeah, I did say that in that video because when you look at our history, it's always stories about the colonizers and the sort of narratives that they want to push out there, and we tend as Africans to occupy more passive positions in our own stories and our history. So I feel like it's important for us to take more ownership and the front seat in telling our stories, because our stories are ours. Nobody knows us better than we know ourselves, and it's important that we tell our stories. And by owning our stories and telling the stories authentically as they are, we take back power. And with power comes self-esteem, and with power and self-esteem comes the motivation to aspire to greater things. Because we have the power. If our forebears did the exploits, the kind of civilization we see in Egypt, in Nubia, for instance, it's something that was done by our forebears, people who looked like us, then it is possible even in modern times for us to do those kind of exploits, because those people were excellent. So for me, I've been advocating for a while now, for us telling our stories, because nobody can tell our stories the way we would, basically. Then I also missed the conversation about infrastructure. I'm just looking at the comment, and I just want to chip in. Infrastructure in Africa, as far as travel is concerned, is not really the best, if you ask me. I haven't been outside Africa, but I've seen videos of travels in the West, and you see there's a clear difference. Like, you can actually take a train and go from one country to the other in Europe within a very short period of time, and at a very very minimal cost. And even with the protocol that comes with traveling across international borders, have really been addressed, or has really been addressed in the Western world. So it's easier for someone to pick up their passport, or to even go with something as easy as an ID card across international borders and go do business, or just explore the next country and then return back. You have the train system well advanced and linking one country to the other. Even the air travel is cheap, and you can actually just go in no time from one country to the other, because they have put in place the infrastructure and the systems that make for these seamless travels across international borders. That's not the case in Africa. If I'm going to travel from here to Ghana, for instance, which is just in next door here in West Africa, it's going to cost me a lot to travel. The first time I traveled to Ghana, which was in 2019, I spent about 30 something dollars on tickets, and that was a one-way ticket. As at then, it wasn't so expensive, but it's still expensive, because that was almost around $1. That was when naira was exchanging at about 300 and something naira. So that was almost still about $1,
A
just a
thousand.
one-way ticket to Ghana. Yeah, a one-way ticket to Ghana. So, which is not supposed to be. It should actually be easy, but the justification around it was because aviation fuel is expensive. That was the justification they were giving, and over the years it has increased. Even the cost for traveling by air within Nigeria has like doubled, has
More than double.
skyrocketed. And the argument is aviation fuel is expensive. Then you go back to the basics. Nigeria exports crude oil. What stops us from refining this oil locally and utilizing it locally and then exporting whatever we have left? There are no
Well,
refineries. In
the
just
the
last
problem
month
is
that
building.
Dangote launched last Dangote commissioned the largest refinery in the world. Let's see how that impacts on transportation and even on the economy generally across Africa, across Nigeria. So what I'm saying in essence is infrastructure in Africa is not as developed as in the West, and that impacts on the cost of transportation um, to a very large extent. You spend a lot traveling from Nigeria to Uganda on a return ticket. I was fortunate enough to get a return ticket for a little less than $500 to Uganda, which is just a few hours flight from Nigeria to East Africa. So it should really be a bit much more cheaper if infrastructure is put in place. If we have trains that connect us between West to East Africa, it's going to be easy. And with the competition, it's going to force these aviation actors to even cut down on their prices. It's going to regulate it. But because now international travels, is done largely by air, so there's really no competition. So they're enjoying that monopoly in terms of infrastructure and availability. I went to Cameroon, which is just like an hour flight. I paid
Mhm.
about $300, on
Wow.
return ticket,
What
which is ridiculous.
was it a return? Was it a two-way ticket or a one-way?
Yes, it was a return ticket, but it's just an hour flight. Like Cameroon is just really next door to us.
Yep.
They're our neighbors.
Well,
Very just like an hour flight.
let
But I had
me
to pay $300 tickets. So
depending on the time of the year, and I'm not really making a comparison because they're two different animals, more or less. But from say Atlanta to Chicago, which is probably a 2-hour flight, if there's a return trip, $300, it's possible to pay that even in the States. But it depends on the time of the year. And a lot of it is, if you get a ticket 6 months ahead, it's going to be cheaper than, oh, hey, I want to go to Chicago in a couple days. So again, I'm not making a comparison because I don't know the dynamics, but you'll pay that much depending on the time of the year in the States. Now,
yeah,
but Africa's
also
Africa's a lot bigger. Going from Atlanta to Chicago, America compared to Africa as far as uh, square miles is a lot smaller. So, it's a rough comparison, but depends. I mean, did you get your ticket like 2 days ahead or 6 months
yeah,
ahead?
so here is the thing. I actually went to Cameroon during the 2021 AFCON tournament, which was held in Cameroon. That was when I went to Cameroon, and even though I had planned my trip, I had planned in terms of preparing my mind and all to go to Cameroon. I didn't buy my tickets months ahead. I probably bought it like a week or so to the date I actually traveled. So I guess you also have a point there that depending on the time, it was reasonable. But given it even on a normal day, normal travels within Africa, they're expensive. When you compare some trips that we go on in Africa to the ones you would embark on traveling from one country in Europe to another,
Right.
it's usually cheaper traveling in Europe than it is traveling in Africa. Yeah.
You mentioned a
Yeah.
refinery. Are they building a refinery in Nigeria?
Yeah, so it has
Yeah,
already
we just
been
commissioned
built
one.
and commissioned. It was commissioned
Oh,
like
really?
a week or two ago, by the richest man, the richest Charles. Who is he? Dangote. Is it the richest black man or the richest African?
Aliko Dangote
Yeah, he's the richest. You Google him,
in
Aliko,
Africa. Yeah.
the richest man in Africa, right? Yeah. So he built it. It has been commissioned. So let's see how that is going to impact our economy positively, and by by extension the economy of Africa, because quite a good number of African countries also import petroleum products. So um, now with this refinery being the biggest in the world, when production kicks off at full capacity, I think Nigeria would be in that good position to do business with other African countries in terms of selling fuel or petroleum products to them, and you know that also is in line with the AFTA agreement, the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, which
Hmm.
has been signed for some years now, a few years now. The aim is to promote interregional trade in Africa, and to just build a robust economy in Africa. I mean, Africa is I think the second largest continent, but bulk of Africa's trade is done with um, countries outside of Africa. So
Right.
we are not harnessing the enormous potentials we have within Africa. So the AFTA since seeks to address that huge economic deficit. Yeah. So let's see how that go. A little steps here and there, and then eventually, someday power.
Yeah. So maybe Stanley, before you continue with your question, and maybe I'll just chip in a few things. So now gas is so expensive in Nigeria, at least by our standards, right? Um, I bought gas of 10,000, 15,000 naira on Wednesday. Gone. I had to buy another 10,000 today. Um, and it won't take me for two days again before it's gone, right? Although it's still comparatively cheaper than some other countries, but given the earnings of many Nigerians, right, and given the fact that the electricity is not so stable, right? So it's a big problem. A lot of people run their businesses on petroleum, on gas, right? And if it's so expensive, the cost of business is going to go high. In terms of that Cleopatra thing, right? So I had a stream with Ada. It was I'll get a clip some other time. It was a closed stream. It wasn't a live stream. So where we talked about um, that controversy, right? And I basically made the point that yes, from history you can see that Cleopatra was a Macedonian, right? The dynasty that was ruling Egypt at that time was a Macedonian dynasty. That's the Ptolemaic dynasty, right? And they're mostly Greeks. And they ruled Egypt for about 226 years, thereabouts, right? But it is also possible, which is what happens when a conquering force comes to a new place. It is very possible that in that 200 and something years, that the ruling Greeks would have mixed with the local population, right? So it's possible that in that time, Cleopatra herself would have some native Egyptian heritage, right? And as at that time, I would say that the Egyptians that are then, because Egypt has been invaded by forces over by different people throughout the course of its history. So there's been a massive demographic change, right? Because Egypt and Sudan were always integrated, and Sudan literally translates from Arabic to mean land of the blacks. So Egypt and Sudan were very, very integrated. It is very, very possible that the earliest Egyptians were dark-skinned people like us, but due to waves of migration from the east, that demographic change has occurred, right? So the whole no controversy surrounding the use of that mixed race woman was a non-issue for me. If at all, she was the best person to have portrayed it because Cleopatra was most likely a mixed race person as well, given the history, given the fact that the Ptolemaics were in Egypt for that long, right? it is possible that they also mixed with the local Egyptian population. So it was a non-issue. Then the other thing I wanted to talk about was, oh, do you have a comment on this, Stanley, before I move on to
No,
the
I
next
was
one?
about to say Ogier's actually made the best point.
Mm,
Because we chatted briefly or texted briefly, and he makes a point about the early peoples of Egypt.
mm,
So yeah, I don't have any. I think you're absolutely right.
mm. So in terms of history, learning of history in Africa, a few days ago, I said to myself, I said, even though I live in Nigeria and in Africa, my education was literally Western propaganda, in quotes, right? Because many things are taught through a European lens, through a Western lens. So that's why you will see many Nigerians, they think they see the world through a Western lens because that's how our education was, right? So, in terms of history, I know a lot about Western history, much more than I know about African history. It's a shame, by the way, but that's the way the system was, right? So you get Western history, you get history from the Western perspective. If you want to learn about African history, you have to do it yourself. It's not
Yes,
something that you're going to be taught in the schools, right? So for most Nigerians, if take look at economic systems, for example, most Nigerians, like Americans, will tell you capitalism is the best economic system. Communism is bad. Socialism is bad. Where do they get that from? From a Eurocentric point of view. Also
right.
from the fact a lot of movies, there's a lot of cultural influences from the West that's imported into Nigeria, into Africa. So yeah, there is that Western facing way of doing things here. So I
Well,
think I'll
see
stop for
that
now.
that's funny because, and I'm not going to get into it now, but
Mm,
that is really my central point. Um, and again, I'm not going to get too far into it, but what you said is 100% right. And a larger point that you're making is if people are going to go and make grand pronouncements about why a certain system is better than another, have you read about it? Have you researched it? Or are you basing this on some high school textbook or what your teacher told you or what you read uh, in the media? I mean, people, and I'm one of them too, but people have a annoying habit of spouting off about what's good, what's bad, without actually researching it. And that's that's American as apple pie, just kind of spouting off. So I'll get off
yeah.
that soapbox.
So you can continue with your questions too. Oh, she's off again. Her network is really really. Uh,
Well, I
so
really just had one major question. What it'll be, what inspired her to want to travel? Her theme is I'm a lifestyle traveler, and I want to ask like what inspired her to do it. One thing I would love to know is travel writing in the West. You'll have your Paul Theroux, or you'll have there's a dude, a black American, like 20 years ago, did a travel book on Africa. And unfortunately, I haven't read it in 20 years, but it was excellent. I'm going to have to dig it out or rebuy it or something and reread it. It was one of the best travel books I ever read. And I'm wondering if there are any, besides Grace, any like travel gurus that are African, books or magazine articles, stuff that, dudes like me can read. Because I think part of knowing about a country is the impressions that professional writers get. I find it interesting when someone goes into a country and they write about their impressions. That's one of my favorite genres of reading.
True. True.
So she'll be back, but I
Yeah,
want
she'll be back.
to know
So,
if she
do you have
has.
any questions for me?
Yeah,
I
well,
think
you too, but
SKC
I,
asked one question earlier, so let me just see if I can answer it,
okay.
right? So SKC says, why does it seem as though Africans don't worry about racism as much as Black Americans?
Well, they
Okay,
don't have
so
to.
uh, my question my answer to that will be that they're literally two different peoples with two different histories, right? So the African in Africa would be more concerned with things like tribalism or ethnic bigotry, right? Because that's the framework they understand. If you transport them to a place like the US, they would not it doesn't translate seamlessly. Just because we have the same skin color doesn't mean we are the same, or that we have the same history, or we have the same attitudes, right? It's literally two different peoples, right? So if I as a Nigerian were to come to America, right, I'm not going to see things through the African American perspective. Just as if you as an African American were to come to Nigeria, you may not even understand the ethnic dynamics, you may not understand the tribal dynamics. You may just see us all as, you guys are the same. Just as much as we will see you over there as you guys are the same. Like, what are you talking about? You're Americans, you're all the same. And it's also possible, it is very, very possible that African Americans will be treated differently than Africans, even in the United States, right? I watched a video that was saying that when the cops, these were Africans and African Americans having conversations, and an African American said something. He said, if the cops were to look at two black people, right, and if they perceive one of them has a foreign accent, they perceive that person as less threatening than the other black person who has an American accent. So they're able to make that distinction between Africans and African Americans, who are two different people, right? So it's very possible that an African American would experience discrimination in America where an African would not. Because to me, I think it's more akin to um, America's ethnic problem, right? So I see white people and black people in America as competing ethnicities. So ethnicities that have, they have issues with each other, just as you would have ethnicities in Africa that have issues with each other, right? So when you go when they see a neutral ethnicity, they are not as amped up against that neutral ethnicity as they are against an African American. So using both as a comparison is not really a fair comparison, in my opinion. Welcome back, Grace. So Stanley, over to you and
Thank
Grace.
you.
Hey, Grace.
Apologies.
I,
Yes.
I, what inspired you to be a traveler?
Did you get that question, Grace?
I think I always say the books. Okay, the
You're
books I
breaking up.
read back in elementary school. I studied English in school, and our curriculum did a lot with literary texts that were written by other Africans, set in other African countries, written by other Africans from West, East, and Central Africa. So reading those books, I would imagine
Okay, oh, network. So I think she's talking about literature, right? So I think in secondary school, yeah, we did do some literature, some African literature, right? So we have like the Call of Rivernon by Gabriel Oka, who is a Nigerian literary Nigerian poet, and the poem goes like, I think I can remember a few lines. I hear your call. I hear it far away. I hear it. Oh, it's been a very, very long time. But it was speaking more to him, reminiscing about his home, right? There is a river in his hometown called the River Non. And when he's away from home, it's like the river is calling him to come back home, right? It's speaking to him. Yeah. And we had some other authors, some other poets from East Africa, even from South Africa. Can't quite remember all of them. Yeah. So I think maybe that's where she's drawing her inspiration from
Well,
the write-ups from those.
in one of her videos, she mentions Chinua Achebe.
Yep.
I actually, and it's really apropos of nothing, about when I was in college, I actually took a modern African lit class at the University of Georgia, and it was probably my favorite class
Mm,
ever. It was just great. And it opened my eyes because I honestly I think that if there is such a thing as an African diaspora, and I've read a lot, but I actually think people in the African diaspora and people from Central and South America have like the most fascinating takes on Western culture, even more interesting than the Europeans. And it's just, I wish more people read um, outsiders' perspectives on some of the, you know, peccadillos or just Western culture can be strange. And I think if you're concentrating on, Greek or Roman, stuff, or, the Kingsley Amoses of the world, you're missing out. Sometimes the outsider's perspective is way more interesting, especially if they've lived for any length of time in the culture.
mm.
So I'll stop there, but yeah,
So
books
so
are.
I just looked up that poem. So let me read it. The Call of River Non says, I hear your call, I hear it far away. I hear it break the circles of these crouching hills. I want to view your face again and feel your cold embrace, or at your brim to set myself and inhale your breath, or like the trees to watch my mirrored self unfold and span my days with songs from the lips of dawn. I hear your lapping call. I hear it coming through, invoking the ghost of a child, listening where river birds hail your silver surfaced flow. My river's calling too. Its ceaseless flow impels my foundering canoe down its inevitable course. And each dying year brings near the seagull the final call that steals the crested waves and breaks into the curtain of silence of my upturned canoe. Oh, incomprehensible God, shall my pilot shall my pilot be my inborn stars to the final call to thee? Oh, my river's complex course. So that was by Gabriel Oka, The
When was it
Call.
written?
It was written in 1953.
Wow.
I think no, it was written in 1950, and I think it bagged an award in 1953. So 1950,
Wow.
yeah, yeah. So oh, she's back, she's back, she's back. And I have poems too. I have a lot of poems I have not published. I used to write a lot of poems. I need to publish my poems.
Well, you got a Substack.
Yeah, I do. I do.
What?
I don't know.
Put them, put them
To
there.
me, my poems are they're so they mean so much to me that I think I will be cheapening it by just putting it out there on Substack. I
What?
want a grand finale for it. I want something big for it. And maybe this is just me stalling anyway, but I really have to do something about them. Welcome back, Grace. So Stanley, back to you, and Grace. Yep.
Well, no, Grace, you were talking about the books you read that inspired travel. Definitely interested in hearing.
Yeah, her network is really, really, really terrible today. I hope we can do this some other time. I think I will have to invite her again another time, um, so we can have a much more seamless conversation, right? So, Stanley, hit me questions. Let me see what I can
Uh,
do.
oh my goodness.
Yeah.
They were all for Grace.
Yeah, so sorry about that. I'll keep
That's all right.
apologizing. Nigeria keeps embarrassing us. Right. So reading those books kind of sparked some curiosity in my mind. Like I wanted to experience those places, those culture, to see those people. And one book always stands out when I talk about this, The African Child by Kamara. Really deep themes in the book. It just sparked some curiosity in my mind, like the African child, the setting, and the culture, the detailed descriptions that creative writers use in their works. It really sparked a great extent of curiosity in my mind. I really just wanted to experience these different parts of Africa that I was reading about from, the pages of the books I had in my hand. And somehow I didn't have the means, and I was young. I couldn't afford to travel and all of that. So I just wanted to experience these different parts of Africa that I was reading about.
Stanley, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can. Can you hear me?
Okay. She keeps going in and out, but I can. So, what other questions?
Uh, I don't know. I've
Ask me about Nigerian politics. Let me see.
well, no. Actually, um, Grace did a video on Nigerian politics, but she's done. I think she's done one or two, or maybe even three, but I haven't watched them all. But I do know you had an election like what a few months ago,
Mm.
and we talked briefly. I think. How's your
Yeah, we
new
have
How's your new leader doing?
much. How's what doing?
How's your new president doing?
He hit us with taking off our fuel subsidy, so that's the first thing he's done for us, and everybody
What
is
I'm
feeling
sorry.
the
What
heat
subsidies?
of that decision. I don't know. It took away fuel subsidy. There was fuel subsidy. We used to have subsidy. Um, that's for gas, right? So the government subsidizes the cost at which we are able to get gas, but that's been taken off now. So gas is much more
Interesting.
expensive. I think it's more than there's a more than 150 increase in gas prices right now, and different cities have different pump prices for the gas. So that's what he's hit us with um, since he's gotten into power. It was sworn in like babe, is it up to a week since it was sworn in, right? On Monday, it was sworn in on Monday. So we're still watching what he's going to do. Uh, I have no faith in politicians. I have absolutely no faith in them. So I don't think anything's going to change. I don't think it's going to be any different from the mess we've had for the last 8 years. So that's why I don't do Nigerian politics, because I it's too close to hope, and it will piss off.
Right.
Some things are just so obvious and so simple, but the politicians just make a mess of it. And you know, and frankly speaking, the election was a mess. The It was a mess. It was a mess, real big mess, and we were robbed of our mandate of the person that we wanted to that we voted for. So that's it.
Well,
So SKC says, what are your thoughts on? Okay, go ahead before I take SKC's question. Go ahead, Stanley.
no, go ahead and ask the question. Romanticizing Africa or downplaying? That's an
No, I
interesting
wanted to
question
take
too.
SKC's. Okay,
Does
so
he
what
have
are my thoughts?
examples?
Black Americans either romanticizing Africa or downplaying its station in the world. I think an example of romanticizing Africa would be the Pan Africanist movement, right? Which some African Americans are sort of with. So for the downplaying part, I don't think I have an example of the downplaying part. But for romanticizing, I think that Pan Africanist movement really big in Africa.
Well,
In fact, I started hearing about Pan Africanism from Americans than from other Africans. In Nigeria, you will not even hear anything about it. Like it's maybe in East Africa, maybe in I think the East Africans are very big with, and maybe it's North Africans like when Gaddafi was an Africanist, right? He wanted Africa to really band together. So, but aside that, it's not really movement in Nigeria. I can't say other African countries, but in Nigeria, it's not. It's not.
well,
We're still
I've run into.
very, we're still very hung up on the Western concept of individualism.
I
Individualism is a very. It's weird because Nigerians believe in community, but they also believe very strongly in the like many Nigerians, despite the mess that the government is doing, well, the government is not supposed to provide jobs anyway. We just want them to fix infrastructure. We just want them to level playing field, let people go out their way, right? So things like, welfare and all those stuff, they're not in the Nigerian mind. They're sort of very, very aligned with the capitalist vision, right? The capitalist narrative of the West, very aligned. So I would even say, in a sense, that Nigeria is much more capitalist than the US, in the sense that most businesses provide their own water, provide their own security, provide many of governments would in any society. Most businesses do that for themselves, right? So it's that's just the way it is.
I was gonna, talk about the part
So
where
Stanley,
can you still hear me, Charles?
yeah, I can hear you. Go ahead.
Um, the part that
Yeah, I can
SKC
hear
brings,
you.
the part that SKC brings up about downplaying Africa, I don't really hear that a lot, but I would say back in the
Mm,
80s, it used to happen quite a bit, actually quite a bit. And I know
mm,
this will. I'm going to say this just to irritate some people. I think Black conservatives downgrade African and
mm.
African heritage from an American perspective much more so than anyone else. And I'm thinking specifically of people like Candace Owens.
You may
Uh,
be right.
they do it all the time.
You may be right, and I don't hold anything against them for doing that. After all, they're Americans, and they should be Americans first. So my problem
Well,
is
I
when you
think you
speak
can
about
be
Africa from an
American
ignorant
first.
perspective,
I
right?
think you
Which
can
I
be
see a
American
lot of.
first and not downplay your heritage.
Yeah, yeah, true, true. But my only gripe with such would be when you're speaking about Africa from an ignorant perspective, right? And you like a lot of Westerners, they see Africa as one place, like it's literally one place, right?
Right,
But Africa is a diverse continent with diverse people, diverse cultures, diverse languages, diverse religion, and in fact, there's more genetic diversity within Africa itself, Europe, and some other
right.
parts of the world. So
Yep.
it's not one place. Yeah, there might be common threads, here and there, but you because she has more experience with other parts of analysis might be more from mostly in Nigeria. She should be able to tell from other perspectives as she's to other parts of Africa. So
I,
my gripe
I
would
will
be
be.
thinking Africa is just you know SKC is asking why Africans have a loyalty to Africa, Stanley. Well, I should. They're not Africans, so point in them having any loyalty to Africa. But and I kind of understand the points of people who sort of have this tie to Africa. I can understand where they're coming from, right? Because we want to look at it, African Americans are still principally an African descended group, right? So history and the culture is has been different for centuries, but principally still an African descended group. So I can understand that filial relationship or that feeling that they have towards Africa, just like white Americans will have towards Europe, right? Many of them have families in Britain, they have families in Germany. There's still some sort of kinship, right? So to just say African Americans should totally cut themselves off from kinship with Africa, it wouldn't bother me, but I understand those who want to sort of rediscover their African roots.
Well, the problem, the problem that, say, an Irish American might have is, they will know literally like where their great great grandfather, which county, in Ireland that he grew up with or in or came from. Not so much
Mm,
with
mm,
ADOS. Um, and for obvious reasons that I won't get
mm,
into, but it's very rare that a person of African heritage, whose family's been in the United States for 200 years, they're more likely to know who their white relatives are than their specific African roots. And in 2023 it can be a big deal, if you're interested in that sort of thing. But I don't, and my political leanings, I just find folks like Candace Owens and to a certain extent people like Thomas Sowell, I find their attitudes disturbing.
Okay, so what about the attitude? What specifically about the attitude do you find disturbing?
Well, I think the most disturbing thing, and I've heard Candace Owens say stuff like this. I know Thomas Sowell would never say something like this. I think, though, I wonder, seems like maybe I can remember, but I have to go back and research. But a lot of that theme is, African Americans, specifically ADOS, in 2023 should thank their lucky stars that they're here. And I actually heard this from a guy like a month ago on
Mm,
Discord, not on your channel, but on another channel where he
mm,
basically said that, hey, a
mm,
black person in 2023 in America who, is middle class should thank his lucky stars that American slavery happened. And I'm like, wow. Um, I have a lot of problems with that statement, but a lot of, I won't say a lot of ADOS, but there are ADOS who think that way, who think that, hey, the ends justify the means. And I thoroughly disagree with that.
yeah. I I disagree with that, but I see the points she's coming from, right? So we can look at it from a literal perspective and we can look at it from an in-depth perspective, right? So from a literal, it is objectively better to be in America today in terms of opportunities, in terms of development and all that, than to be many parts of Africa. I can't say most parts of Africa. That's objectively true. But on the other hand, when you look at it from a 360 perspective, right? Like you said, the ends don't always justify the means, right? The people who took slaves from Africa, they were not doing it out of the goodness of their hearts. They were
Exactly.
not saying we're doing this so that in 200 years your ancestors better opportunities, right? That
Exactly.
despite their ill intentions, things are better for African Americans today. So you can't
Well,
really use that and say, well, thank your lucky stars that slavery happened.
well, not logically, but making an argument about serendipity that, hey, we didn't know it would be like this 200 years ago, but as it turned out, it wasn't such a bad thing now, was it? You can make that argument, but boy, that that
Mm.
kind of, you're not going to convince me that living in, say, the worst neighborhood in Chicago is serendipity. The opportunities may be there.
Yeah. Another thing, Stanley, another thing, Stanley, that I keep no, now this might be my gripe with African Americans, right? Like you just mentioned Chicago now. It seems that whenever there's discussion about African Americans, people always pivot to the worst parts of Africa, experience in the US, right? I
Right.
think I know enough to say that most African Americans are not living in squalid poverty or living in the ghettos, right? Why is that narrative always the at the forefront of discourse about African Americans? Why is it always either crime or the ghetto or poverty, right? Why is that the narrative that is the overarching narrative when it comes to discussions about African Americans? I find it strange.
Well, it's easy, it's in the news, and it's dramatic. It's a good story. Hearing about some dude who lives in,
Mm,
a small town in Georgia, and I'm not dodging bullets, that's boring. And much like, and it works.
mm,
America is that kind of place. Drama is good. We are a Hollywood society. Making the news or going viral is, hey, it's immediate gratification. And sometimes it's good, but rarely. So I just find it
mm,
interesting that, people will bring up Chicago or St. Louis, but they won't talk about Bakersfield, California, which actually has a higher crime rate for certain types of violent crime than
Hmm.
Chicago. You know, Chicago is like 10th or maybe even 15th on the list of cities. Chicago is not, I don't think Chicago's even in the top 10. So Chicago's a big city and it's easy, is my answer. It's not necessarily true. And there are at
Hmm.
least a handful of Republican run cities that are as violent. They're way smaller.
Hmm. So if you put it in if you put it in that frame, saying, okay, there are also a handful of Republican run cities that are that violent. If you want to put it in a comparative, in absolute terms, right? Maybe what percentage of Democrat run cities compared to Republican cities are spots for violence?
Well, it's going to be more percentage wise and statute. They're going to be more Democrat cities, but the bigger cities, the more crowded cities tend to be Democratic run. So there's no way you can sugarcoat it. That specific point is correct. But is it really, you can make
Okay.
that point because it's easy to understand, but is it really the right way to think about it? My a point I would
So,
make or a counterpoint I would make is it would not hurt my feelings for a Republican to win an election in Chicago or New York or wherever and clean up the city. Wouldn't hurt my feelings. Why are Republicans, if that is a big deal and law and order is such a big like thing, a big talking point, what are they doing to turn democratic cities red? They're all they're doing is denigrating and talking about the problem. They're not taking the lead in solving the problem. So they're right.
yeah,
More democratic cities,
I think
democratic cities
I
have the
think
biggest
that
problems.
I
But
think
what are they doing to change it? Why are they just sitting back and going, oh, those Democrats? What are they doing to fix it? What are they doing to win the elections? What are they doing to sway Democratic voters in a Baltimore to vote Republican?
I think you have a point, because this is sort of the conversations that I have where some conservatives will complain that, our blacks are voting overwhelmingly for Democrats, and I'm like, well, how do you purchase something that's not on the market, right? Is if the if the Republicans are not cutting African American votes, how do you expect them to just magically want to vote for Republicans? It's an election. It's not, it's about you cutting voters. It's about you convincing voters that your vision is better for them, not telling them that, well, you're going to vote for the other party anyway, so I wouldn't even bother. I wouldn't even try, right? So
In in in
it's
a
a 50-50
way,
problem, in my opinion, or more than a 50 problem.
in a way, it's the soft bigotry of low expectations. Black people will vote for a Republican. One of my best friends in life was a guy that I knew in the Navy. And dude is a Republican.
Mm.
I He used to tease me about it. I used to tease him about it. And I told him shortly before I got out of the Navy, if you ever run for office, I'll be your campaign manager. There are a lot of things we disagreed on, but the
Mhm.
dude was capable and is capable. He's a two-star admiral. He is literally one of the most capable people I've ever met. He knows how to fix problems. So the right Republican can get black votes. You still
SKC,
there?
what says I hate it when I agree with Stanley. Yeah, I
Yeah,
am.
I know. It's like it's really painful.
Stanley, you have quite a reputation. You have quite a reputation that people with you. You must be something. See, you're muted. You can join the conversation.
What's up,
Yeah, I'm
SKC?
hey, what's going on, Stanley? What's going on, Charles?
Yeah,
I mean,
go
I
ahead.
I I agree
Ah,
and
good,
disagree.
good, good.
Um, I think one of the major points that I disagree on is that um that Black Americans would just support um a support a Republican if they knew that they knew that that person had their best interest. I don't think that that's true. I think a lot of the prevailing narratives in the minds of a lot of Black Americans is that the other side is just inherently racist, and that's the end. The end of it. It's when you talk to the masses and you ask them certain questions, they don't talk about policies or any of that stuff. They lean in on narratives about racism. Take for instance when the whole Trump thing happened, the nominal black voter, even to this day, was stating stuff about racism. Even though you could show them pictures of the history of Trump with all sorts of working with all sorts of black people. It did none of that matter. It's just as long as you blow the dog whistle of racism, you're pretty much cooked in Black America.
Can I respond? SKC, are you from the South?
I am.
Okay, well, something my father used to say, um, and it wasn't just about white people, but people who smile on your face and shake your hands aren't necessarily the ones who have your best interests at heart. Everyone has black friends, and especially Republicans. So, Trump, like, having a photograph with Don King or Mike Tyson, okay, it's a picture. You know, it doesn't mean anything substantive.
Yeah, I'll give you that. A picture or two that doesn't give a full description of someone, but at the same time, when you look at things and like take for instance Jesse Jackson having his campaign aided by Trump, even to the point to where
Well, back when
his
Trump was a
headquarters,
Democrat,
back to the point to where to the point of where Jesse Jackson's headquarters was in Trump Towers. I mean, it's like, come on, what are we doing here?
okay, Trump contributed money to the Clintons. Is he a Democrat?
What's your point?
Okay, my point is optics or what Trump did 20 or 30 years ago. Yeah, I will freely admit he contributed money and supported Jesse Jackson. That's not the Trump in 2023. Things change, is my point.
Right, and the only thing I'm stating is that for Black America, if you were to ask the um, the layman. Hey, what did Trump do to you that was racist? They won't be able
Oh,
to
for
tell you.
God's sake. I don't even know how to answer that question. Nothing.
Okay,
And that's what I
so
mean. That's what I mean. It's like as soon as the
Okay,
so
well,
to give an
it,
example,
it
can we
as
do
comes
soon as
down
soon
something?
it comes down to this. You are
Let's
more willing to give Trump the benefit of the doubt, and that's perfectly fine. Don't have a problem with it. I am not. And better than that, given history, American history, that ADOS doesn't give the benefit of the doubt is justifiable. And that's pretty much
mm,
all I have to say.
well, Biden was given the benefit of the doubt.
I don't see your point.
okay. So I think we're going over to Trump and Africa. So let's recenter
Right.
the conversation. So SKC, what do you think about the conversation so far? Do you have any questions from stream so far? Do you want any sort of clarifications, follow up? Grace, we're going to have another stream with Grace some other time when the network is better. But at least she said some things. Did you find anything she said interesting or anything I said interesting that you want us to expand on?
Yeah, I mean, there were a few things that I found when you guys were kind of talking about infrastructure. That's around the time where I dipped in on the conversation. But I was wondering about the. I find it quite fascinating how how divided Africa is. Of course, I know it's a huge continent with many different in many different countries, but one of the things that I think has it seems from what I from the little knowledge that I know that seems to harm such things such as infrastructure and travel would be some of the divisions that have been between the different African countries. I mean, am I wrong about that or?
Well, let me ask you a question. Um, that Africa is divided within Africa and it harms infrastructure or travel, is that a singular thing that's limited only to Africa, or does it happen other places?
I
That's
don't
a
know.
question.
I don't know. You
So
tell me. I mean,
Well, let's talk about Europe, Ukraine, Russia. I think that's having an effect on travel and infrastructure. Let's think about what's happening within the United States, or let's go to South America. Africa is not unique, is my point, in that um, international conflicts affect infrastructure. That's not particular to Africa.
what?
yeah,
You
so
heard
there is to answer your question, it's not as if Africa is disunited, right? It's just that different nations in Africa, and each nation is pursuing their own agenda. If there are opportunities for cooperation, yeah, there will be cooperation. I think they can be better cooperation. We have the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS sub-region, and there is trade within the ECOWAS sub-region. And Nigeria does a lot of the supply in terms of manufacturing in the ECOWAS sub-region. For example, 60% of the medications in the ECOWAS sub-region usually come from Nigeria. So there can be more, there should be more cooperation. There are very few inter-country conflicts in what you get right now is mostly right. So ethnic tensions or Islamic terrorism that are cross border. So, for example, the Islamic will be attacking in Nigeria, in Niger, in Cameroon, in different African countries, right? They're the same Islamic group. They're just attacking targets all over Africa. But within itself, seeing one country fighting another country, I can't recall a time when that's happened in living memory. I can't recall when that's happened. Yeah, so that's what I'll say to
Well,
that.
my simple response is, unlike, the conservative point of view of Africa, Africa's not a monolith.
I don't know.
Yeah,
I
and most
never.
countries are pursuing their own agenda, right?
Mhm.
I'm tweaking you a little bit, SKC. So forgive me, I couldn't resist.
Yeah, I mean, I get it.
Go
I
ahead,
just
SKC. Go ahead, SKC.
I don't know
Yeah.
of any conservatives that have a um a singular view of Africa being some type of
Oh,
super continent.
I
I mean,
beg to
in
differ.
fact, in fact, take for instance, the hated Thomas Sowell. He wrote a lot about Africa and spoke a lot about how people have this weird view of it being like this one country when in fact it's several countries and with
Which
a
which book
vast amount of
specifically?
geography and different geographical challenges of its own.
Do you recall the book that he wrote uh, about Africa, or was
Uh,
it an article?
no, it's in the book. I believe it's in. I want to say it's in cultures and let me see here. I can find it for you really quickly.
Because I will definitely buy
SKC,
that
did you
book.
say some people hated Thomas Sowell? Like Africans hate Thomas Sowell?
No. I was saying
Did you say
that
something
Thomas
like
Sowell
Africans hate
he
Thomas
wrote
Sowell?
about Africa. Yeah, I was saying that there's some people who have
Mm,
weird views about him, and and as a conservative, he didn't have this
mm.
weird view that Africa was just some huge singular country that had one mind set. It's a culture and race, Stanley. That's where you can find it.
Okay, but that's about African Americans. It's not about Africa.
But I I think so. My critique of Thomas Sowell would also be I think he falls into the trap also in Africa through a almost a monolithic lens. Because watch these videos, I know what exactly you're talking about and possibly why Africa is poor. He talked about Africa's geography. He talks that's
He
so fun.
he's
He talked
basically
about
imitating. Have you
possibly
heard of Jared
diseases. He talked
Diamond?
about access to the sea, and I no, no.
There's a book.
My problem, Thomas Sowell. I think he's sorry, Stanley. Let me just get this point across. I think have a point, but I think his point is too narrow, right? I think there is more to why Africa is what it is today. Um let's take when most African countries were gaining their independence after years of colonial exploitation and raping. immediately these fledgling countries got their got their independence, what happened? The Western capitalist nations forced them to open up their economies to, right? Well, it's a good thing, but when you are at that disadvantage, there is an unequal exchange that is created where it will still be as if resources are moving from the global south to the global north, right? My country's economy was devastated by structural adjustment program, which was, you know, which was initiated at the request of the, is it World Economic Forum? There was this a global body advising African countries, I think in the 80s, to do a structural adjustment program, and that totally decimated our economy. Our currency went into a free fall. Right, this market is a developing market. You open it up to competition to a much more advanced market. Your potential difference will tell you where the flow of, like, Africa is very import dependent right now because there was no time for the local industries to develop to be able to compete in the international markets. When you have goods from Europe, you have goods from other much more advanced economies. So yes, part of the problem was geography, but I think he's not looking at it from a robust perspective. He's not looking at it from the fact that, after he centuries of colonial exploitation and then continued with capitalist sort of capitalist exploitation. I mean, many of the mines, many of the oil fields in Africa are owned by foreign multinational corporations, and those things are going to be the interest. They're going to be in the interest of the multinational corporations. Then you factor in corruption, endemic corruption, you get an idea why Africa is where it is today. So I think Sowell's analysis is a little bit narrow. For an economist, I thought he could have done a better job of providing a much more robust analysis to why Africa is where it is today. So that would be my critique, SKC.
SKC, I haven't read the
I-
book,
i-
and I'm
if
definitely
I
gonna
could,
get it.
yeah, if I could add in one thing really quickly, the the point of conquest and culture, that's the actual book, culture and conquest. I'm sorry. It's not to give a analysis of why Africa is in the position that it's in, or any different country or various cultures. Um, some people have taken different sections of the book, and like you said, there's been some YouTube shorts on it and so forth, but the purpose of it is just an exploration of various cultures and different conquests that took place throughout history that a lot of people are unaware of, and how that affected history as a whole. It's not to give some overarching reason as to why certain countries are where they are in modern times.
Well, let me ask you a question, and I will get the book and read it. Is Soul making a geographic argument about the difference in cultures?
Yeah, he actually
Okay,
does.
let
He
me
actually
let
does
me
state that when you look over all of the globe, where you find that different cultures met and thrived in certain places, perhaps waterways and rivers, having access to
right.
seas, other geographical things that divided certain people from another
Certain
for
animals,
longer than
certain grains, certain climates.
all those things.
Okay, well let me tell you, and I haven't read the book, but I guarantee you there will be footnotes in his book from a guy called Jared Diamond, who wrote a book, I think it was back in like 1995 or so, called Guns, Germs, and Steel, which is a masterpiece. But a lot of Guns, Germs, and Steel,
I've heard
because
of that book.
Jared Jared Diamond, some or most of what he says has been kind of disproven. The book is a masterpiece. It is a work of art. Even if some of the theories have been disproven, it's just a beautiful book. Soul is not being original. Jared Diamond was original and
Well,
brilliant
well,
at it.
I have the ebook,
Cool.
and I just did just a a cursory control F search for that in the bibliography, and it's not in there.
Okay.
He didn't
Well,
quote from it.
that's fine. It's not an original idea. Thomas Sowell, he's not being original.
No, but I don't think that's a negative to him if it's not being original. If he's expanding on an original point, a point that's been made by someone else, if he's expounding on it, making it much more lucid, I don't see a problem with it. My own is that let it be factual, let it be true, let it be let it be right, not just rehashing something that's like
And
a
I'm gonna
narrative.
be did Sowell have a co-author?
I don't know. I don't know.
No.
Okay. Because I'm gonna be a credentialist here. And I think that public intellectuals, not just Sowell, left, right, center, whatever, they tend to overreach. I don't think that, and I will read the book. Who knows? I
Yeah,
might
and
agree
and
with them.
so made that point too, and I think in Intellectuals and Society, where he said that some intellectuals make the mistake of thinking because they are competent in one area, then they are competent in other areas or in many areas. Prime example, Jordan Peterson, right? Who thinks he can comment on everything now because he's a psychologist. So yeah, it's true that some intellectuals, when they start getting famous for one particular thing, somehow they think that gives them the credentials to speak authoritatively on anything, when your competence might just be in just one narrow field. So kind of stick to your field.
But I also want to compliment Dr. Soul. The one thing you can never say is he is in bad faith. He is very sincere. And I just get the impression, and I've been watching Thomas Sowell since I was a teenager, like back on William F. Buckley's firing line. He is sincere, and I may tease and all this stuff, but he has my total respect.
Yeah, I think
What
he's a great mind though. I think he is actually.
what
Go
was the
And,
ahead,
name
and
of
Jordan.
the book
SKT,
again?
I am
What
gonna get the book and read it. I thank you for
Guns.
bringing it to
I
my
think it's
attention.
guns, steels, and what that book, guns,
Guns,
steels.
Germs, and Steel,
Yeah, okay.
but I've read Guns, Germs, and Steel. I haven't read Thomas Sowell, this particular book, and I'm going to get it because I'm eager to read it.
Okay, so Guns, Germs, and Steel by Jared M. Diamond.
It's brilliant.
Right, and I think that well, I'm looking at it on Internet Archive. So help, let me make sure that I have this correct. Let me look of the publishing date of this.
It's like
So
1996,
all right, so yeah, it's saying 97.
97. My bad.
All right, and
I have a first edition, believe it or not.
Race and Culture came out in 94.
Oh wow. Okay, you
So
got me.
it's no way he could have lifted that idea from him.
You have gotten me there. So I,
Yeah,
I will definitely read it and get back to you.
yeah.
It, it
Did you
could be
read
that it may be the other way around.
Doubt it. you have to know Jared M. Diamond's background. He's like a field anthropologist. He has much more experience in the field as an anthropologist. He's a UC. He was at UCLA. He was a physiologist, believe it or not. He has much more of a scientific background than Soul. However, you're right. Soul has the original idea, and I will read it eagerly.
You should also try. I think I will try and get Intellectuals on Society because I like the arguments that he makes in Intellectuals on Society. I really, really do like that. So that we don't keep having Jordan Petersons repeat themselves.
Yeah, you know another person that is like that, Charles. Is a great, in a specific field, but then in other fields are completely off. Um, God, what is that guy's name? It just slipped my mind all of a sudden.
Black guy, right?
No. It's a white guy. He is a
Jonathan Haidt.
no. He's a linguist.
Oh, Chomsky.
Chomsky, Noam Chomsky.
Yes, Noam Chomsky. Same thing, man. Great linguist. I mean, probably eminent for our day, but in other areas, I mean, completely just ridiculous.
Yeah, I only just recently discovered that Chomsky was is a linguist. I thought he was some sort of political scientist because I kept seeing videos of him making commentary on geopolitics. So then I
Well,
discovered he was a linguist. I was like, oh,
I agree, SKC. However, he he wasn't like he gets deeper into the philosophy of language, and there is some crossover about philosophy of language and political science. But overall, I agree with you. He gets over his skis sometimes.
Can I ask a question to it? I have to go very quick, but I want to ask SKC. In the last decade, the number of millionaires in Africa has dropped significantly. Why do you think that is, SKC, from your point of view?
I don't think that I'm qualified to answer such a question.
I don't think anyone here is.
Well,
So Anan, we'll leave that
why
for
do
the
you
experts.
think?
Yeah.
Anon, you're the
The full
economist. Why
extent
do you
of it
think?
is difficult to understand. Now, 6 countries are doing well, right? That doesn't apply to them. It's hard to know why. I mean, why did South Africa implode? That is, and also Nigeria. Why has it also not done well since 2015? Difficult questions to answer.
Well,
Um,
actually, I could probably do South Africa, and I'll just do it from an apartheid point of view. Would you like to hear my answer?
Specifically, what has gone wrong since 2007 in South Africa?
It's not what has gone wrong. It's what was wrong up until apartheid ended.
Yes and no. Look, it doesn't explain what's happening post
It
basically
could.
Mandela leaving.
A shaky foundation, no matter what you build on top of it, the structure's going to be, that's very symbolic, very philosophical. But if you don't have a good base, building's not going to stand for very long.
Yeah, well, South Africa's gotten a lot worse. Electricity grid has imploded. The railway system's imploded. The whole country's imploding. It's not normal. This is not normal. It's
Well, it's
actually
not
hugely
normal.
disappointing.
You live
Yeah,
in the States, right?
yeah. The U.S. doesn't have this
So
bad.
is our infrastructure getting better?
In California, yes. In most of America, yes, it is. It depends where you are, though. But in general, yes. America has the lowest cost per ton mile of rails of almost anywhere in the world. It also has low electricity costs outside of California and these other green states where it's very expensive. But in general, the U.S. does well by many infrastructure metrics. It's why the U.S. economy is able to function.
Oh, okay. So we're not going to hell in a handbasket like you keep saying.
No, I think we are, but that's just because kids aren't doing well in school. But America has a lot of the other fundamentals down. The problem is kids are not studying and kids are becoming more violent than they used to be.
I think the problem is too many kids live in Florida.
Okay,
Go
let
ahead.
me ask another question, SKC,
It's a
since the
joke.
topic has
It's a
changed.
joke.
Yeah, SKC, why do you think that academic scores are stagnant to falling in the US? Why? And I'll ask a more controversial question. Since 1970, the ADOS, non-ADOS high school academic gap. Why do you think it's been widening, in your opinion?
Culture.
Wait, so you're saying culture is basically the problem with plummeting African American academics?
And don't
Correct.
forget
So
plummeting
Wait, hold it.
Appalachian
so
scores.
please,
So
so
SKC, is that what you're
Stanley,
saying?
Stanley, I know where SKC is coming from. I want to hear the answer from the other side, from your side, from the side of the left, right? So if it's not culture, like he said, right? What is it?
Well, no, I agree that it's culture, but
Okay.
it's not black culture because I think black culture is American culture.
No,
Thomas
so,
Sowell,
so
Thomas Sowell, Thomas
Stanley.
Sowell of all people
Mm,
makes the point in Black Rednecks that really it's the inner city culture is basically something that got learned.
okay, so Stanley, this is where I agree with you, but I would
I
disagree
don't
with
think
you.
there's a separate black culture.
So I agree with you, and this is I would disagree with you, right? Because you keep making these convenient distinctions, right?
Oh, it's convenience is best.
Very, very convenient distinction. Now you're saying it's American culture, it's not black culture, right? But when it comes to racism, you're not saying it's an American problem, you say it's a white people problem. Why
Oh
do you
no,
make
no.
those
Oh, come
distinctions?
on, Charles. I have said that racism affects everyone,
Yeah,
including
but
the
you say it's
racists.
the white people's problem to fix.
I have, but I've also said you would think that racism affects black people more than white people. And no, it affects white people just as much, but in different
That's
ways.
that's not my point. The point is you think it's a white people problem to
No,
fix.
it is a white people problem because it's emanated from European culture, but
So
black people are European culture too in the United States
so why is that a white people problem? But
because it's
I
60% of
don't
the
I,
population
I
for
don't get.
starters.
No, one is a white people problem, the other is an American
Okay,
problem.
let
Those
me ask
those
no,
splitting of hairs is
again, I'm not being very clear and it's my fault. The Constitution was not a document that had input from a very diverse population. So let's start from the Constitution. And if you
it
know,
it doesn't
there was not
matter.
a lot of input. I think that white women in
There is
1776,
Stanley, Stanley. There is no input from anybody today, right, on the Constitution. So if you're saying it's a white people problem, then you have to say it's
did
the
black
white
people
people of old.
found Charles?
The
Did
white people of today,
did black
did they found
did
anything? Did they found the Constitution?
did black people
Everyone was handed what happened. Everyone was handed to them. Whatever you're having today was handed to them by the people of.
you're avoiding my question.
What's your question?
Who founded the country? The United
Americans
States
founded the country.
specifically.
Americans
Was it
founded
a
the country.
diverse?
Well, okay, so to answer your question very simply, yes, European descended people founded the country.
It in the shorthand, the colloquialism is white people.
So white people founded the country. Good.
So
However,
it's a white
however,
people problem.
no,
It's
no.
it
Let me
was
tell you why it's not the white
emanated
people
from
problem.
white people, and it's up to they're still 60% of the population.
But see, the white person today was
Congress
not the white person.
Congress is
The white person
95%
today,
white.
it doesn't matter. But the white person in Congress
One
today was
black
not the white
president
person.
out of 47.
Stanley, listen to my point. My point is, right? The white person today is literally not the white person who founded the country 200 or so years ago.
Well, black people now are not the black people who were slaves under.
Exactly.
It's
Exactly.
still a white people problem.
It's not a white people problem. It's
It
an
is
American
a
problem.
white people problem demonstrably.
It's an American problem demonstrably.
Okay. And most Americans are black.
It doesn't matter.
Okay.
It doesn't matter. So okay, so crime in Chicago, is it a black people
Well,
problem?
wait, hold it. Is Chicago the whole country or just Chicago?
No, let's look at Chicago. Crime in Chicago, is it a
Oh,
black people
you
problem?
just criticized people for bringing up Chicago.
Well, I'm using it to make an example. I want to make an example. Crime in Chicago, is Chicago a predominantly black city? Is it
Okay.
predominantly black? Is it predominantly black? I'm asking a question.
You know, I'm
I don't
I'm
believe
just gonna
so.
say yes. Is that
I think that your argument would be better suited if you were to take the argument from Chicago and just say insert Baltimore. It's
Oh,
going to give you the
good. So
same result.
let's use Baltimore. So Baltimore is a predominantly black city,
so
right?
now we
So
have to switch to a different part of America.
is crime in
It's
Baltimore?
Okay.
the same.
Is
It's the
crime in
same
Baltimore, is it
Then
a
you
country
black
now.
people problem? Is it an American people problem? In Baltimore, crime in Baltimore City itself, is it a black people problem or is it an American problem?
Yes,
Yes to what?
it is a black people problem.
Okay, good. I,
It's a
I
majority black city, is it not?
yeah.
How can
So
it not be a black people problem?
so at least you are being consistent on this. So I just want that consistency. I'm fine either
Well, no,
way.
you know what, Charles? You think that I'm very political. If the majority of a city, you could say it's a Democrat problem and be just as correct.
But I think it would be more accurate to say it's an American problem. I agree with your
I would
first
agree
statement that
with
it's
that too.
an American problem. But when you start parsing it into because white people are a majority, so it's a white people
Oh, no,
problem.
no, no, no. No, no, no. I'm not saying crime in Baltimore is a white people problem.
I know you said it's a black people problem because black people are predominant in
And
Baltimore.
we control the city.
Well, I still think it's an American problem. Yes, what? What do you want?
I think you would be correct there too, but I'm saying certain types, I think the root cause of America, and everyone on this panel will disagree, but I think the way the Constitution was constructed by one particular demographic is the root of the problem.
All right. So SKC, your thoughts, final thoughts before we draw this to a close. I have a flight tomorrow. I am traveling to another city, so I have to rest. So,
Yeah,
your thoughts.
sure. I just when it comes to the education bit, what Ann was talking about, yeah, I think it centers around culture. How do you socialize your children from a very young age, and what are you feeding them mentally? And then also the um, the family background. Of course, that has a significant effect upon young children, whether they're in a single or dual parent household. A lot of those things factor in as to their ability to to thrive and learn, and even their behavior patterns within when they go off to school. Then there's other parts even beyond that that a lot of the learning of outside curriculum. There's so much that a strong family teaches its children throughout throughout the child's life. Yeah, the culture is, I think, the primary factor that affects the test scores and also other facets of learning.
Yep. So, Stanley, let's
I
get your
I would
thoughts.
I would like to have SKC on a show to talk about that education slash family, who educates children. I would love to have that conversation specifically on the points he brought up because it's fascinating. And
Mm.
a lot of it I disagree with, but I don't want to belabor the point. But if we could arrange that, it doesn't have to be next week, just whenever. I think it's a subject, um, education in general, but the points he brought up worth discussing, at least in my opinion.
Yep. True. True. So, it's been a fruitful, close to 2 hour conversation. Thank you, Stanley. Sorry, guys, for the choppy. The show was choppy today, and Grace has promised to come back.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So,
She's great.
yeah, she is. She is. So, good show. Thank you guys for watching. Well, I'll just say, concluding, part of the reasons why I don't focus so much on Nigerian politics, I would say, is mostly because it's too close to home for me. And, you know, so maybe I'm just distracting myself with American problems. Uh, I see the silliness in, I mean, some things are just as Americans will look at the woke nonsense going on and they say, well, this thing is so simple. Why can't you decide what a woman is, right? In my own country, well, some things are just so simple. Why can't the government just get their act together, right? Fixing a road that's getting bad, it's just so simple. Why do you have to steal the money that you need to fix that road? Why don't you just do what you promised to do? Why do you make false promises during elections? You come out and you make these wonderful promises, and then when you're elected into power, nothing happens, right? So, well, if you guys are wondering why I don't talk about Nigeria so much, maybe try to understand it from that perspective, right? So,
You just like the American clown car.
yeah, I think the American clown car is more is funnier, right? It's funnier. So because in a way I look at America's problems and I just look at it like these are silly problems. We have real problems. Your problems are silly. So it's easy to make fun of silly problems in my opinion than real problems. So Stanley, thank you for coming. Any final thoughts before we're done?
No, sir. Enjoyed it. Hopefully, love to talk to Grace again one of these days.
Yeah. So
And thank
SKC
you,
said
Sean.
that he'd be open for a conversation, the one you suggested. So maybe we can plan a time for it, maybe next week or anytime. SKC,
Yeah,
just let
my
me know
my mother
when.
was a teacher also.
Ah, good. So it's the battle of teachers' children. All right, guys. We'll catch you in another live stream. It's bye for now.